Yeah, crown me king, tell them heathens.
Shalom, and welcome to another edition here on the Genesis 49ers page, where we say no to vague interpretations and we give thorough breakdowns.
Genesis 49ers, we back, but never moving backwards. Here to put Israel on the atlas. Y'all know the slogan. We say no to vague interpretations and give thorough breakdowns. So, I'm back. It's been a while, been a hiatus, but let's get right into it. I have a goodie for y'all. This is going to be very impactful. I foresee that this video is going to be referred to by a lot of brothers and sisters for the simple fact that I believe it's a topic that we have yet to really focus on. And I took out the time to actually give you guys 19 slides of pure information about Eurasia and the Native American Sub-Saharan commonality. Because we have a split in the community where you have some people saying Negro only and Latino only, Native only, like they're going against the grain. And I want to bring forth empirical data, not just a paradigm. I want to give empirical data that supports the argument, that supports the premise that Eurasia is the connecting factor between the Native Americans and the Sub-Saharan quote-unquote Africans. So let's get right into it. First slide. The Eurasian origin of Y-chromosome Haplogroup E. So again, we're dealing with Eurasia as a commonality between Sub-Saharan Africans and Native Americans. So we're going to start with the SSA group, or the Sub-Saharan African group, and prove that they have ties to Eurasia. An origin in Asia and return to Africa was proposed long ago for the Y-chromosome African haplogroup E. This hypothesis was based on the derived state of its African YAP positive, which anytime you see YAP positive, that's the parent haplogroup. So again, YAP positive haplotypes 4 and 5, haplogroup E, with respect to the ancestral Asian YAP positive haplotype 3, haplogroup D. The later discovery of new markers evidence that D and E were sister branches of the YAP positive node. Haplogroup D showed the derived status for M174 and the ancestral status for M40 in Asia, whereas haplogroup E was characterized by derived status of M40 and M174 ancestral status throughout Africa. Thus, the migratory sense between continents of both haplogroups cannot be assured. A few YAP positive individuals ancestral for both markers were detected in West Africa and in Tibet. Although assigned to the para-haplogroup DE, this actual ancestral state could not be confirmed. So that's the purpose of this paper, to study the migration of this genome and see where it came from. And they're using its cousin, haplogroup D, and they're seeing that, hey, we see it in West Africa and we see it in Tibet, right? And that's how they come into the conclusion that it had its origin in Asia. And the source for that is carriers of mitochondrial DNA, macrohaplogroup L3 basal lineages, which basal just means base or beginning, migrated back to Africa from Asia around 70,000 years ago. And again, I don't agree with the deep time, like 70,000, 100,000, 200,000 years ago. But that's what's in the paper, so that's how I read it. So, and the source is PMC and VM Cabrera et al. And anytime you say et al, it means in others. June 19, 2018. Because the reason why it says in others is because these scientific papers is just not one person working on the data on the paper. It's a collective or a group of geneticists working on the paper. All right. Moving on to the next slide. The Eurasian origin of the Y-chromosome haplogroup E. Furthermore, a new mutation P143 united the two other Eurasian haplogroups C and F as brothers, and in turn DE and CF were joined to an ancestral node defined by mutations M168 and M294. The initial scenario proposed to explain this complicated situation was that two independent migrations out of Africa occurred, one marked by D and the other marked by CF pair of lineages. However, a new interpretation arose following the discovery of more than 60,000 single nucleotide variants by next-generation sequencing techniques. The most parsimonious interpretation of the Y-chromosome phylogeny constructed with these variants is that the predominant African haplogroup E arose outside the continent and back migrated to Africa. So that's the conclusion they're coming to, is that haplogroup E arose outside of the country, out of that continent, and then migrated into Africa, right? So the origin of haplogroup E, according to this scientific research, is not within Africa, because I know the competing theory is, oh, haplogroup E derived in the Horn of Africa, but according to Cabrea's work, this haplogroup originated outside of it in Asia. And the source for that is the same source that I used prior. Carriers of mitochondrial DNA macrohaplogroup L3 basal lineages migrated back to Africa from Asia around 70,000 years ago. You can find it on PMC, and again, Cabrea and others are the ones who worked on this paper, and it was published June 19, 2018. Now let's deal with the ancestral clade, right? We see a notable increase in the number of lineages outside of Africa around 50 to 55,000 years ago, perhaps reflecting the geographic expansion and differentiation of Eurasian populations as they settled the vast expanse of these continents. Consistent with previous proposals, a parsimonious interpretation of the phylogeny is that the predominant African haplogroup E arose outside the continent. This model of geographic segregation within the CT clade requires just one continental haplogroup exchange, E to Africa, rather than 3, D, C, and F out of Africa. Furthermore, the timing of this putative return to Africa between the emergence of E and its differentiation within Africa by 58,000 years ago is consistent with proposals based on non-wide data of abundant gene flow between Africa and nearby regions of Asia 50 to 80,000 years ago. So again, this source is backing up the last source. This is what they're quoting about the parsimonious interpretation of phylogeny and the predominant haplogroup E arising outside of the continent, right? So it's correlating that, again, haplogroup E did not originate in Africa, but outside of it. So if anyone says, oh, you guys are claiming to be these people from ancient Near East, but you are West African. Well, you got to understand the ancestral clade, the YP positive, the parent haplogroup that haplogroup E comes from the Middle East, comes from the ancient Near East. So we do have a claim. If you have haplogroup E in your DNA, you do have a claim to ancient Israel, the ancient Levant, the ancient Near East. Because Cabrea's work and Posnick's work that we're reading now confirms that. This is based off empirical data. And that's what my channel is made for, to bring forth empirical data. We say no to vague interpretations and we give thorough breakdowns. That's the slogan. So again, the source for that is punctuated bursts in human male demography inferred from 12,044 worldwide Y chromosome sequences. You can find it on PMC. David Posnick and others are the ones who worked on the paper, and it was published April 25th, 2016. Eurasian E. A Eurasian origin and back migration to Africa has been proposed for the African Y chromosome haplogroup E. Inside Africa, frequency distributions of maternal L3 and paternal E lineages are positively correlated. This correlation is not fully explained by geographic or ethnic affinities. This correlation rather seems to be a result of a joint and global replacement of the old autochthonous male and female African lineages by the new Eurasian incomers. What does the word autochthonous mean? Autochthonous means the original inhabitants, the natives. So they're saying that haplogroup E came and replaced the natives, or the original people of, quote unquote, the continent of Africa during that time period. That's what autochthonous means. It says the replacement of the old autochthonous male and female African lineages by new Eurasian incomers. The new Eurasian incomers is those who carry the haplogroup E. So again, we can see it with empirical data that haplogroup E had its origin outside of the continent in Asia, and then came into the continent of Africa that we call it today, right? Because it replaced the old autochthonous male and female African lineages by what we call the new Eurasian incomers. And the source for that is carriers of mitochondrial DNA, macrohaplogroup L3, basal lineages migrated back to Africa from Asia around 70,000 years ago. PMC and Cabrera and others are the ones who worked on this. June 19, 2018 is the date of publishing. So we're going to keep it moving. Now let's look, because they're saying that, oh, that occurred 70,000 years ago, but the point is that is the origin. I use relative dating, so these huge balloon astronomical dates are really not a problem for me, because I can just look at what happened first, and then I'm trying to see what happened in sequential order. So what first happened, haplogroup E arose outside of the continent of Africa and eventually migrated into the continent of Africa. Now let's go into more recent times, the Neolithic and Epipaleolithic, which is about 20 to 10,000 years ago, and the Neolithic was like a year, like about 10,000 year period. So let's read about this era, or this epoch. This finding contrasts with both earlier Neolithic and Epipaleolithic, which Neolithic means new stone or stone age, right? Levantine populations, which were dominated by haplogroup E. So the Levantine, or the Levant, was dominated by haplogroup E during the Neolithic and Epipaleolithic periods. This is fact. So if anybody tell you, oh, you claiming a lineage that's from ancient Near East, when you have West African or Sub-Saharan DNA, or you have the haplogroup E in your DNA test, okay, just because you have the haplogroup E doesn't exclude you from the ancient Near East, because we're reading haplogroup E dominated the Levant during the Neolithic and Epipaleolithic periods, which the Neolithic during that time was the Neolithic Revolution, where agriculture was spread across the world by the Natufians and the Levantine Farmers. And we're going to get into that. But I want to read the rest of this. It says, which were dominated by the haplogroup E and later Bronze Age individuals, all of whom belong to haplogroup J. So haplogroup E came first, and then J later. J comes later. You understand? But it was dominated by haplogroup E first during the Neolithic times, all the way into the Chalcolithic, which Chalco means bronze, the Bronze Age. So it says, source, ancient DNA from Chalcolithic Israel reveals the role of population mixture and cultural transformation. And you can find it on Nature, and Haley and others are the ones that are responsible for this paper. And it was published August the 20th, 2018. So here's a common link. Such a scenario would also explain the presence of Y-chromosome haplogroup E in the Natufians and Levantine Farmers, a common link between the Levant and Africa. So Natufians and Levantine Farmers had the haplogroup E. They're responsible for spreading agriculture throughout the world, into Europe, into Africa. They're responsible for it. It's called the Neolithic Revolution. You can look that up. They brought forth agriculture, and anytime you see agriculture, that's really the basis of civilization, because you got to have a food source before you can develop, high society, writing, and all these other things, because you're not spending most of your resources on hunting and gathering. Now you can be settled in one locale and actually don't have to worry about food and resources on that matter, and focus your time on intelligence, or on civilization, on writing, on government, right? So when anybody saying an argument of where civilization started, look for agriculture. And agriculture started in the ancient Near East. It started in the Levant. So that's where we should find it. Anyway, that's a whole nother topic. The Natufians and Levantine Farmers did carry the Haplogroup E, which were ancient peoples of the Levant. So you brothers and sisters that have the Haplogroup E, you brothers and sisters have ties, ancestry to the Levant. Again, we say no to vague interpretations and give thorough breakdowns. That's what Genesis 49 is about. And the source is Paleolithic DNA from the Caucasus reveals core of West Eurasian ancestry. So if you got the Haplogroup E, you have West Eurasian ancestry. It's just that, it's that blunt, it's that clear. And you can get this article on BioRxiv by Lazarus and others, the geneticists that were responsible for this paper, and it was published September the 21st, 2018. Moving on. Haplogroup E. The Levantine Farmers. Haplogroup E is distributed across much of the continent and may be associated with the spread of pastoral and agricultural communities. So again, we brought forth the Levantine Farmers and Natufians, their Neolithic revolution, and them bringing forth agriculture throughout the world. So you see them spreading through and migrating. And we also see Haplogroup E, which they carried, coming into Africa and being associated with pastoral and agricultural communities, because through them, that's how it spread. And the source for that is DNA for Archaeologists. Elizabeth Smith is the author. Page number 98 to 99 is where you can find that quote. A population without Neanderthal admixture, basal to other Eurasians. Remember, basal means beginning. May have plausibly lived in Africa. Why are they saying that? Because they're tracing it back to the Haplogroup E. So it says craniometric analysis have suggested an affinity between the Natufians and the population of North or Sub-Saharan Africa, a result that finds some support from Y-chromosome analysis, which shows that the Natufians and successors of Levantine Neolithic populations carried Haplogroup E. Remember, we read earlier that Haplogroup E dominated the Levant during the Epipaleolithic and Neolithic times, all the way into the Chalcolithic, right? And it says of likely African origin, which has not been detected in other ancient males from West Eurasia. So the source is genomic insights into the origin of farming in the ancient Near East. You can find it on PMC. Lazarus and others are responsible for this paper, and it was published August the 25th, 2016. Now let's deal with the Iberomaurusians. North Africa is a key region for understanding human history, but the genetic history of its people is largely unknown. We present genomic data from 15,000-year-old modern humans, attributed to the Iberomaurusian culture from Morocco. We find a genetic affinity with early Holocene Near Easterners, best represented by Levantine Natufians, suggesting a pre-agricultural connection between Africa and the Near East. We do not find evidence for gene flow from Paleolithic Europeans and late Pliocene North Africans. The Taufarat individuals derive 1/3 of their ancestry from Sub-Saharan Africans, best approximated by a mixture of genetic components preserved in present-day West and East Africans. Thus, we provide direct evidence for genetic interactions between modern humans across Africa and Eurasia and the Pleistocene. So they're looking at these Taufarats and they're seeing the Sub-Saharan African element, at least 1/3 of their DNA, and they're proving that there was interactions between the Near East and Africa. And that's the whole purpose. Why? Because we already brought forth papers that say Haplogroup E had its ancestry in the Near East. We brought forth papers that say that Haplogroup E dominated the Near East, dominated the Levant, and Haplogroup E is responsible for spreading agriculture throughout the world and throughout the continent of Africa. So that's why you would see 1/3 of the Sub-Saharan people consisting of Sub-Saharan African DNA, and they also consist of Natufian DNA, which also carried the Haplogroup E. So you can't get around Haplogroup E. And the source for that is Pliocene North African genomes linked Near Eastern and Sub-Saharan African human population. National Library of Medicine, where you can find that, and Marieke van de Lutrecht and others are responsible for the paper. It was published May the 4th, 2018. Natufians. We compiled frequencies of Y-chromosome haplogroups in its geographical area and their changes over time in a data set of ancient and modern Levantine populations. And note, similarly to Lazarus et al., meaning others, that haplogroup J was absent in all Natufian and Neolithic Levant male individuals examined thus far. So haplogroup J was not a part of this ancestry. They came later. That's what a lot of people don't understand. A lot of people don't even understand haplogroup J is found in Africa as well. It's one of the haplogroups in Africa. But it wasn't even around during the Neolithic Revolution, the what we would call the forefathers or the patriarchs, which from my understanding, according to my model, these will be Shemites. These will be Shemites. Some of them will be Ham as well. We're not calling all a haplogroup E Shem, but a lot of these people that were in the Levant would have to bring forth the people that came from Shem, as far as Ishmael or the Sumuel tribes. If you read in history, they call it the Sumuel. As far as the Israelites, as far as, you know, our Faxadians, the Ashurites, the Assyrians, and so on and so forth. It says also, but emerged during the Bronze Age in Lebanon and Jordan, along with the ancestry related to Iran. And the source for this continuity and admixture in the last 5 millennia of Levantine history from ancient Canaanite and present-day Lebanese genome sequences. And you can find that on Science Direct. Mark Haber and others are responsible for the paper. July 27, 2017 is the date of publishing. Now we're moving on from the Sub-Saharan Africans, the quote-unquote West Africans, African Americans, where y'all come from, your ancestry tied to the Levant in the East. We proved that. Like I said, we say no to vague interpretations and give thorough breakdowns. Now we're going to move to the Native American stock and how they relate to the West Eurasians and to the Levant as well. Now this is Haplogroup X, which if you don't know about Haplogroup X, it is found amongst the Native Americans. So let's get right into it. Similarly, haplogroups A and B are predominantly found among Native Americans. Haplogroup X is one of the exceptions to this pattern of limited geographical distribution and is found at low frequencies among West Eurasians, northern groups of Native Americans, as well as in Northern Africa in the Near East. A very high global genetic diversity has been reported for Haplogroup X. So it's found in the Native Americans. It's found in people in Northern Africa and the Near East. That's where you find this Haplogroup X. That gives them a tie to the Levant, to the Near East, and to West Eurasia. And the source for this is the Druze, a population genetic refugium of the Near East. And you can find it on PLOS 1. Laron I. Ishlus and others are responsible for the paper, and it was published May 7, 2008. So let's keep it going on the slide. Northern Israel lineage. According to our model, we claim that the Native Americans are Northern Israel or the Northern Kingdom. because the kingdom split, if you don't know, from Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Jeroboam took 10 tribes or 9 tribes, and Rehoboam took 2 tribes or 3 tribes, Levi, Judah, and Benjamin, right? And we through our model, we believe that the northern kingdom of Israel dispersed into several lands and migrated and went into America, traveled to America, and populated America. And this seems to correlate with our model. So, in a way, the golden standard of science is predictions. So that prediction would have went like this. Hey, according to our model, we're saying Native Americans are these people, or these said people coming from northern Israel. We should predict to find genomic data that correlates with that. And guess what you find right here? Genomic data that correlates with that story. Because you have people in ancient Native America matching people in ancient northern Israel. That's what we see in the genomic data. Here it is right here. It says the only other place on earth where X is found at an elevated level apart from other American Indian groups like the Ojibwe is among the Druze in the hills of Galilee and northern Israel and Lebanon. So again, that lines up with our model perfectly. Perfectly. And this is why we must stick to empirical data, man. We are trying to create a concrete foundation for our model. So we have to use empirical data. This lines up perfectly with our model, saying that the northern kingdom of Israel gave birth, are the progenitors of what we call Native Americans, and we have genetic information and data backing that up. And the source for that is Cherokee DNA Studies, Real People Who Prove the Genetics is Wrong by Donald N. Yates, page number 70. So let's deal with the pedigree. In 2009, Willerslev's team traveled to Hermitage State Museum in St. Petersburg, where it had arranged to collect a DNA sample from one of the Malta boys' arm bones. We hoped that he could tell us something about the early peopling of the Americas, but it was a complete long shot. He says the team found that the DNA from the boy's mitochondria, the energy processing organelles of living cells, belonged to a lineage called Haplogroup U, which is found in Europe and West Asia, but not in East Asia, where his body was unearthed. Now, I brought this information out before. The video is titled Native Indians Are Not Mongoloids, and I use this as the crux of my argument because their ancestry extends beyond East Asia into West Asia through the Malta boy. Right? His body was found in East Asia, but his DNA did not line up with the East Asians. It came from a lineage called Haplogroup U, right? Which goes back to Europe and West Asia. So this gives the Native Americans a tie to Eurasia. And a source, American natives have European roots. You can find it on Nature. Ed Young, November the 20th, 2013 is when it was published. Native American ancestry. Native American ancestry. But the boy's nuclear DNA, the bulk of his genome, told the same story. Genetically, this individual had no East Asian resemblance, but looked like Europeans and people from West Asia, says Willersleb. But the thing that was really mind-blowing was that there were signatures you only see in today's Native Americans. This signal is consistent among people from across the Americas, implying that it could not have come from European settlers who arrived after Christopher Columbus. Instead, it must reflect an ancient ancestry. So the Native Indians and Native Americans have signals in their genomic data that points back to West Asia or Eurasia, right? Ancient ancestry. And it says Maltaboy's genomes showed that Native Americans can trace 14% to 38% of their ancestry back to Western Eurasia. The author concludes. Source: American natives have European roots. You can find it on Nature by Ed Young, November the 20th, 2013. West Eurasian origin. The distribution of genetic lineages 24,000 years ago must have been quite different from what we see today, says Jennifer Rife, an anthropologist and geneticist from the University of Texas at Austin. It would be interesting to see what other genomes from this time period look like. Again, I put this into the presentation because a lot of people go off of phenotypes and how people look today, but you got to understand, gene surfing can change the way a population looks very fast. There could be a variation in genomic data and also phenotypic expression very quickly. It doesn't take that long. So that's why I put this in here, because they're saying the distribution of genetic lineage is around 24,000 years ago, according to their estimates and their clock and their time scale. Must have been quite different from what we see today. And I believe that's the case. That ancestry doesn't necessarily have to look like how they look today or vice versa because of gene surfing, phenotypic plasticity, imperfect dominance. Imperfect dominance means that the dominant genes are not always passed down, and we're talking about nations that could have bottlenecked as well. So there's so many factors in that. So I wanted to bring and present this as well. And the sources: America's natives have European roots. The source is Nature, Ed Young, November the 20th, 2013 is when it was published. Genetic evidence. Remember we brought up Haplogroup U earlier with the Maltaboy. Remember that. It says the main criterion for inclusion in the study is that test subjects must have obtained results not placing them in the standard Native American haplogroups A, B, C, or D. Hence the use of the word anomalous. Most subjects reveal haplotypes that were unmatched anywhere else except among other participants. There proves to be a high degree of interrelatedness and common ancestral lines. Haplogroup T emerges as the largest lineage, followed by U. Remember, U was found in the Maltaboy in Asia, in Siberia. X, and remember, U ties them to the Western Asians, Eurasians, and quote-unquote Europe. X, J, and H. J is usually associated with the Arabs and the quote-unquote Ashkenazi Jews and the people that's claiming the land now, and H. So you see all of these haplogroups in the genomic data from the Native Americans, pointing their ancestry to Eurasia once again. So we proved the Sub-Saharan Africans had a connection to Eurasia, and now we're proving the Native Americans have a connection to Eurasia, which is a commonality between both people groups. It says similar proportions of these haplogroups are noted in the populations of Egypt, Israel, and other parts of the East Mediterranean. So you see it in Egypt, Israel, and Israel, meaning that these people have ties to those lands. You can't get around it. It's inescapable. We can see it with the empirical data that Native Americans have ties to Eurasia, to the Levant, to Israel. Period. So source, Cherokee DNA studies, real people who prove the geneticists wrong, done on N. Yates, page number 56. Now, I added this in there as well because a lot of people believe in the Barringer and the Barren Strait theory, which I disproved with one of my videos about the Barren Strait theory being debunked. You can check that out. If you just go to the writings, what did the native people themselves say about the peopling of America? Not people just coming with putative statements, and putative means assumed, pretty much. They just assume that it happened. But what did the Native Americans themselves think about the peopling of America? What did they write about? Now, we go to the Mayans. The Mayans had a writing system, and they wrote down and recorded their history. So we can read what they said, And here it is. It says all major Kachian sources are consistent in relating that the mythological founding fathers of the Kachian nations originated from somewhere across the sea. According to the Popal view, the forefathers Balaam Kitse, and Balaam is an Aramaic Hebrew word which means Lord, right? Balaam Akab, Mahukuta, and Ike Balaam came from Cha'apalo, which means across the sea, and Relet Akij, where the sun emerges, that is from your east. So Maya is in Mesoamerica. That's where they ruled, in Mesoamerica. East from Mesoamerica, it would be Africa, it would be Europe, it would be Eurasia. That's directly east. And they came across the Atlantic Sea. That's the sea that they're making reference to, because that's eastward from Maya. So they're saying they came across the ocean from the east. And we look at the genomic data, it ties them to Eurasia. So these people are claiming to come across the sea from these people from Eurasia. If we look at if we tie and correlate the genomic data with the historical writing, that's the conclusion we come to. And it fits perfectly with our model of the peopling of America coming from Eurasian stock, Israelite stock, and it also is a commonality between Sub-Saharan Africans, because we're saying that a proportion of them as well come from there, right? And the source for this is Pre-Columbian Landscapes of Creation and Origin, editor John Edward Staller, page number 122. Now, this is very pertinent because it's coming from the Mayans themselves. This is their history. They recorded it, and this is how they interpret the peopling of America. Period. Commonality. Now put this in here because you got people saying, oh, well, these people don't look like these people. So first of all, the Native Indians were variegated in appearance and phenotypic expression. That's one. Secondly, gene surfing. You can have someone that's related to you look completely different to you than you. You got to realize that this happened 4,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago. There's a lot of time for separation, bottlenecks, and gene variants, gene variation, and variable expressivity to take place to separate these races. And for you people that believe in the biblical model, you will have to adhere to that, because you're teaching that all nations and all races come from three brothers, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, which would mean all the variation that you see, all the expressivity that you see, all the phenotypic expressions that you see on the earth came from those three people. So you can't then backtrack and say, no, it's not possible that these Israelites can look like Sub-Saharan Africans and then the other ones look like quote-unquote Native Americans or East Asians. No, bruh. The Bible tells you that all races come from three men after a bottleneck event known as the flood that killed off all of the populations of earth, and it survived through Noah, his three sons, and their wives, which are only 8 people, which will have to provide enough genetic diversity to create all of the races you see on the earth, quote-unquote races, East Indians, the Nordic people, the Balkan people, the Russians, the Sub-Saharan, the North Africans, the Khoisan, so on and so forth, the Native Americans, the Vikings, everybody. So you believe in heterozygosity just like I believe in and subscribe to heterozygosity, which means this person can have a differentiation and variation in allele frequencies and phenotypic expression and genetic variation. But anyway, that's why I provided this, to show that the Native Americans, the ancient ones, had that same variation. That's why when you go to Maya, there's different frescoes and wall paintings of dark-skinned Native Americans, and you have lighter-skinned Native Americans. You have a variation. It's variegated because they are a heterogeneous population. Israel's heterogeneous. It's not homogeneous, heterogeneous. And a lot of factors play into that. But that's for a whole nother video. Let's just deal with this slide, the commonality. I do not attach as much importance as do some to difference between bones, especially the bone of skulls. Too often we find beneath the same mound brachiocephalic and dolichocephalic skulls, the skulls of the Caucasians and the skulls of the Negroid type. All varieties from extreme long heads to rounded or nearly square heads have been found among undoubted Eskimo crania. So the mounds in America, ancient mounds built by the Native Americans, you find Negroid skulls and Caucasian skulls amongst Eskimo crania, which are the Eskimo skulls. So that showed there was a variegation of Native Indians here. That was just wasn't one type. They're not homogeneous. They're heterogeneous, meaning they come from heterozygosity, heterozygotes. That's how the whole earth was differentiated, and a variable expressivity exists on the earth because these three people had that genetic potential and they passed it on to their children. It's that simple. It's not hard. Even Jacob with his 12 children, they would have the phenotypic plasticity, the variable expressivity. So when years and years pass, they have children, they mix, do admixture and stuff like that. Of course, the generations after them are not going to look exactly the same. And that's what we see in genetic research. And that's how we see all races come about. Period. All phenotypic expression come about. So again, that's the purpose of my channel. I'm trying to raise the bar, so to speak. We say no to vague interpretations, and we give thorough breakdowns. And the source for this is Prehistoric America, Marquise de Narillac, page number 194 and 195. So the conclusion for the whole matter is this. Remember, the topic is the commonality of Sub-Saharan Africans and Native Americans and Eurasia, because Eurasia is that commonality. We linked both people groups back to Eurasia, both of them. We we learned about the Native Americans, the Haplogroup U, the Malta man, all of that. So here's the conclusion of the matter. The information provided is strong evidence for an argument favoring African Americans, Native Americans, and West Africans being in the lands associated with the biblical Israelites. The Malta man proves that the Native Americans have ancestry in Western Asia. Haplogroup X is strong evidence for Native Americans deriving from northern Israel. Natufians and Levantine Farmers carried the Haplogroup E. And remember, these are two ancient precursors in the ancient Near East, in the Levant. Remember, we read they dominated. Iberomaurusians possess 1/3 of Sub-Saharan DNA, which ties them to the Levantine Farmers and Natufians. Haplogroup E dominated the Levant for 12,000 years according to secular sources, Neolithic and Epipaleolithic epochs. So we gave strong evidences for the commonality, which is Eurasia, that ties Native Americans and Sub-Saharan Africans together. So I pray that you took notes, you wrote down the source material, and I pray you be able to build on this. Again, that's the whole purpose of this channel, is to bring forth empirical data that we can build on. That's what edification means, to build. In Spanish, it's edificio, meaning building, right? So we're trying to build on the knowledge and wisdom that we have. And first and foremost, we need to create a strong foundation. All this information